a Lonely Place with Matt Pinfield. Today's guest, John Easdale from Dramarama.
Hey everybody, welcome to In a Lonely Place. I'm Matt Pinfield. I'm your host. Remember, you're never in a lonely place. If you have music in your life, it's got me through everything. Speaking of music that's gotten me through everything and a lot of times ups and downs, my next guest is not only one of my favorite songwriters, but he's one of my favorite people. You know, I've been following his band from the very, very beginning. In fact, so much so that when they put out their first EP, I had them on my college radio show at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I was like really flattered because when their first full-length album came out, they only had about 6 thank yous on it, special thanks. And my name was one of them. And that album, of course, is such a classic and just one of my favorite records of all time. So I want to introduce you to our guest. His latest album with his band is called Color TV. And the band is Dramarama. I want to welcome to the show, John Easdale. John, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Hey, Matt. How are you, buddy?
You know, I'm doing good, John. I'm really happy to see you, and I want to thank you for doing the show. Sorry, I'm a phlegm there.
The pleasure's all mine, sir. It's my pleasure.
You know, John, we go back to the very, very early 1980s, which is really cool. I mean, you know, I remember you guys reached out, and I knew Pat Pearson. We had a mutual friend that we love, and he's like, you know, there's this great band, Dramarama. He said, would you have them on your college radio show? And I said, sure, let's do it. And it's amazing because, you know, you guys started out, let's talk about it. You grew up in Wayne, New Jersey. Now, people know Wayne, New Jersey because the band Fountains of Wayne named themselves after that actual place that was a fountain shop. It was a store that was right on the highway there off of Route 3 and 46 or something like that, right?
Correct, right? 46.
Yes, and it's you know, and also, of course, there were many scenes of The Sopranos shot there.
They would go there to have little conferences. Yes,
it was really
all
cool.
Statuary. It was fountains and statues. You know, something that the Italian Americans of New Jersey enjoy having in their backyards and their front yards as well.
Absolutely, it's pretty amazing. So, talk to me about growing up in Wayne, New Jersey. I mean, you and I love so much of the same music, and you know, the covers that you've done throughout the years are really represent so many things that were important to you and I growing up, artists that we love. But tell me what it was like growing up in Wayne, and, you know, just how you discovered rock and roll as a kid.
Well, you know, as close as it was to New York City, it might as well have been, you know, way further away. You know, it was very suburban. And when I was little, Wayne was pretty much the end of the road almost for the bedroom communities of Manhattan. Past us was farmland. Of course, now the suburbs go way further. But yeah, we were a regular small town suburban kind of thing, and just, you know, normal average growing up with, you know, New York media, you know, TV and radio mostly. So I think, you know, you and I both kind of did some discovering on our own, probably in our teenage years, because certainly a lot of the music that we were listening to and that influenced me the most wasn't what was on the radio or what you could see on television. You had to go dig a little deeper and go out and search of that stuff.
You really did, because, you know, I mean, no disrespect. I mean, I like a lot of those radio DJs, and I'm friends with them. I've worked with them at Sirius XM, but, you know, I thought that they never played enough of the stuff that I wanted to hear. And I you know, it was very mainstream. In fact, there was a period where you couldn't turn on the radio without hearing Peter Frampton Comes Alive, Steely Dan Asia, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, and those records are warmed to me again, you know, now that I've had distance from them. But when I was a teenager, I just couldn't stand hearing them on the radio over and over. That and the bad disco that was out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, there was a certain kind of sound that, yeah, I think it caused me to seek out other things, you know. And then there were things like the magazine Rock Scene that would write about stuff, and you know, the punk magazine and stuff. That there were things going on, but it just wasn't on the big radio stations or on television for that matter.
It really wasn't. I think when the first time, right, that it finally was, there was some good radio in New York. When I say good radio, was I mean, they certainly played the things that were mainstream, like the Eagles, Tune, Fleetwood Mac, but that station WPIX for 3 years, from 1978 to 1980, they would play, like, they play imports on a Saturday morning, and you hear like the first cycle for Sister Europe, or you'd hear, like they would play things like, the Clash and, all these different bands back then, the Jags, all these, the Police would sleep on, the band, the Police would like sleep on the floor there when they were on tour the first time at PIX. So that station was great because at that point, of course, you and I were already out buying and looking for different records, whether it be like Roxy Music, Lou Reed, things like that. I mean, we were just into different stuff. And that was the station that came the closest to being something that we enjoyed, I think, around that time, right?
Absolutely. For a brief, bright, shining moment. Yeah, there was good music on New York Commercial FM.
When did you start writing, realizing that you wanted to be a songwriter? Like, how old were you when you first started laying down lyrics and writing songs?
Probably like 16, 17 years old. I think the first bands I was in when I was like 14 or 15, I just was like everybody else, sang covers, the Beatles, Stones, tried to sing Led Zeppelin, could never really hit those notes, but whatever was popular at the time. I was in a couple of bands, and we played covers. I try to sneak a song off Ziggy or something in there, but yeah, no. At first, it was covers and singing covers in band, but then I realized, that's not how you get any further in the world. I just started writing songs because it was something that interested me. And I guess I was like 16, 17 years old.
It's amazing when you guys, so you and Chris Carter, there was a record store in North Jersey, Looney Tunes, that you guys had. And what were the years that you had that? Was that like 78 up to like 82 or something like that? When
I graduated in 79 and they opened in like September, and I pretty much moved in. I was there every day, all day. Except when I had other jobs, but I had like 2 or 3 other jobs during that time, and I pretty much would get fired because I was at the record store and they needed someone to cover, so I just wouldn't show up to my real job and worked at the record store.
I mean, it's great. In that period of time, I remember I was going to record stores all the time, New Jersey, like where we were from. Like there was, Cheap Thrills in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and here, of course, Vintage Vinyl started in Irvington, then it ended up in Ford's. But there were just cool record stores that you would go to, Record Center in East Brunswick. I mean, but I was there just looking for new stuff from England or independent stuff, British stuff, power pop and new wave and all that great stuff. And it was just a really fun time to buy records, as a teenage kid. And you and I are right in the same age, really. So. But tell me about when you actually started realizing you wanted to start a band. You and Chris Carter there.
Well, we were in the store, and we were trying to do a cool, Greenwich Village type of rock and roll store. We didn't sell Kenny Rogers' greatest hits or Michael Jackson Off the Wall or whatever. We carried imports and the kind of rock and roll that we liked, and it wasn't a great business model for the neighborhood, but we didn't care. We were trying to be cool, and it was actually Tommy Mulaney and Chris Carter's store, and I was just kind of the fair-haired boy who hung out. I wasn't a partner, but they tried to be a really cool record store. They had bands come in and do autograph sessions. They had the Ramones and David Johansen, Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson, the Plasmatics. It was really, it was a beautiful, magical thing. And we started seeing local bands like the Bongos put a 45 out. And actually the bass player came down and bands would come in and bring their 45s and just, give them to us on consignment, and we'd sell them. And we started seeing all these local bands making their 45s, and we were like, I personally said, I could write better songs than that. We could make a better record than some of those. Not better than the Bongos, maybe, but some of the other bands that were around at the time that were bringing us their 45s. So we started the band in the basement, and it was me and Chris and Mark Englert, a.k.a. Mr. E-Boy, who I've known since we were 2 or 3 years old. He lived not next door, but one house down, and plays guitar. So the three of us went in the basement and started doing like 4-track recordings. I played the drums, Chris played bass, and Marky played guitar. And we started doing our recordings. And then we went in the studio. I'd say it was like 1980 when we went into a real studio and started doing our recordings.
Yeah, and you did that first EP, which was, that you got around to like pretty much the local record stores at that point. Was it distributed anywhere outside of New Jersey at that point? No,
that was, I think most of them ended up in our basements or in our houses. I don't even remember how we distributed stuff. Although, I actually do remember, because Chris, after the store closed, which is when we really started, when we made the record, when we made our first 7-inch, Chris worked at a One Stop. So he put it on sale at that. So it probably got into some stores that way. But yeah, no, we just had our own label and put out our 3-song 7-inch, and then we put out a 5-song 12-inch, and that's when we came down to RSU and we're on your show, and we were just doing it ourselves mainly and mailing it out to people and trying to get it in the paper, get it in the Aquarian Weekly, and we actually got it written up in Trouser Press, which I don't know how they got a hold of it, but from there, it got to a DJ in France who started playing it, and that led to us eventually being signed by this label called New Rose in Paris.
Yeah, and they were the label that named themselves after that song by The Damned, and that was the only way to get the first album for a long time, Cinema Verite. Now, tell me about making that first record, because it's such a classic. What was that deal like? Because I mean, back in those days, it probably wasn't that expensive a record to make, was it? I mean, was it one of those situations where they gave you a small budget? Did you guys pay for it all yourself?
No, they gave us a couple of $1,000, I think, maybe 2 or possibly 3.
Yeah.
But not more than that. And the way we did it was actually, we put half of that record was the EP that we put out. It was called Comedy. And the other half we recorded to fill out and make a full-length LP. So the recording of that album was kind of spread out over a couple of years, and there's like 4 different drummers on that record, including myself. And
which songs did you play drums on?
I know for sure I'm on Visiting the Zoo, and I'm not really sure if I'm on any of the other songs, but definitely Visiting the Zoo, the first song on the album. And I'd have to go through and say, did I play on that? Did I play on that? Because I don't, some of them I did and some of them I didn't. Most of them I didn't, but I know, say, Femme Fatale was our very first drummer, was a guy named Ron Machuga, who joined, when it came time for us to want to play out live, we got a drummer and another guitar player named Peter Wood, who is still with us to this day. And me, Mark, and Peter are still doing it, 40 years later.
So great, though. I mean, I think about it. One of the things that was great, I mean, you listen to that first side of that album, and now going Visiting the Zoo, to Questions, into Scenario, into anything. I mean, that album side was, it was insane. It was one great song after another. I mean, both sides, obviously, but even your choice of covers were unbelievable. But I need to ask you, what's so cool about the record, and something that I related to, was there were a lot of songs about relationships, like Questions, basically was, when you're, all these things, when a relationship ends, or things that you kind of you want to ask somebody, or you're wondering about when you're no longer with somebody, and or basically asking the person that they're with now. And it's Scenario, just such a great song as well. Were most of those songs coming from a personal place? at that period of time?
Some of them, like anything is pretty autobiographical. I think Questions is pretty autobiographical. Yeah, when you're 19 or 20 years old, romance is everything, and love and heartbreak. You think you're never going to get over stuff, that you eventually do get over. But yeah, the wounds were pretty fresh at that point. So some of the romantically based songs were pretty autobiographical. Some of the other stuff, was me trying to be, a poet of some sort.
But it worked. So tell me, Anything, of course, is such a classic song. We know that, and we'll talk about how that exploded. But that was absolutely a autobiographical story, right? I mean, you were married at a very, very young age, weren't you?
Yes. That was a teenage wedding. And actually, the old folks did not wish us well. They were not they were not behind us in any way, shape, or form. So we did the smart thing. I definitely recommend anybody that is in a band and gets married when they're teenagers, move into an apartment building which is downstairs from the rest of the band.
Yeah,
it didn't work out. Of course, the apartment itself wasn't much bigger than this room I'm in right now, and it was a very small apartment in a very small building that also had the four guys in the band, and so I was upstairs more than I was downstairs.
Yeah, and you're young too. In marriage, we at that age, it's we don't even know who we are at that age, right? I mean, we're still growing in such a big way.
Oh, we thought we had it made. Love could conquer all, and we were wrong at that. She was an assistant manager at McDonald's, and I was running the tape department at a disco mat, and we were both like making just above minimum wage, I think. And yeah, we weren't prepared for living happily ever after at that point. We thought we were, but time told a different story.
And when the whole final verse comes in with "I got wasted, she got mad, call me names and called her dad," was that absolutely autobiographical as well? The whole thing.
Absolutely, and the part I left out was we got in a fight, a physical altercation, and she tried to bear hug me, and I busted her off. I didn't hit her, but I went like this, and she fell and she broke her tooth, and he came over with a gun, and it was scary.
That is pretty crazy. It's amazing. What's funny? One time I was living in New York City, and I was staying in a hotel in Central Jersey. I'd moved back from when I was doing Farm Club, a TV show with Jimmy Iovine and stuff, and I'd come back to do Columbia Records, when I was doing A&R, and I remember I would sometimes go down and we get a hotel in Central Jersey just to get some things done and not stay in the city that night. And also to get my baby girl out of the city, of course, out of New York.
Sure.
And I remember I'm in the parking lot of this hotel, and I guess there was a wedding going on. She wasn't the bride, but a woman came up to me and said, "Hey, Matt Pinfield, I'm the one, I'm John's ex-wife. I'm the one that he wrote anything about." So she came up to me and told me that story. And I just remember going, yeah, it's a classic. She obviously didn't have any ill will at all with her conversation, because you guys, you were so young,
Exactly. No, we're still, on speaking terms, and luckily we didn't kill each other.
Talk to me about how the record ended up getting into Rodney Bingheimer's hands at K-Rock in LA, and how, because that absolutely changed the entire trajectory of your lives, you and Chris and, and Mark and everybody, Pete, and the whole crew. Talk to me about how when you first found out that he had gotten a hold of this album and pinpointed that song off the record.
Well, we were back in Jersey, and Pat Pearson knew a girl who knew a friend of ours, Greg Dwinell. And we didn't know Greg, but Greg was living out in California, and he told her, he said, "Hey, I think your friend's band, Rodney's playing your friend's band on his Sunday night show." He had a show just on Saturday and Sunday nights. And that's how we found out about it. Rodney actually just picked it up as an import at a record store in Pasadena called Poobah's, and I think he picked it up because the album cover had Edie Sedgwick on the cover. Yeah,
Edie Sedgwick, not Edie Brickell. Edie Brickell wasn't. That was a little later.
Yes,
married to Paul Simon, right? But Edie Sedgwick, I mean, obviously he was familiar with the Factory and the Andy Warhol background and Chow Manhattan, so which was really cool that you put her on the cover. So that's why he picked up the record. And he probably also, I'm guessing, saw that you had covered, like Femme Fatale, Velvet Underground. You know what I loved about when the Velvet Underground versions of it with Lou singing, I always preferred like on those bootlegs or those live albums to Nico.
Oh, definitely.
Because I wanted to hear it from a guy's perspective, So I loved when you did it. It was great for me because I was like, wow, this is good. It's nice to hear this song coming out of that way. And then you did Candidate by Bowie, which I thought was also a really cool thing because you took that from the center of that sweet thing, like, that whole area, that thing that's in the middle of side one of Diamond Dogs.
Uh-huh.
That was a really cool kind of, I thought, brave and cool thing to do on a record. Tell me about picking that.
I think for the cover, that was a direct influence from the Smiths, who had different people on their covers of their singles and stuff. So we were trying to do something. Yeah, Edie, the book about Edie by Gene Stein and George Plimpton had just come out in hardcover. So we basically ripped a picture out of the illustrations inside that and put it on our album cover. Didn't ask for permission or anything. And later got a letter from the photographer Gerard Malanga saying, "Hey, you used my picture on your album." And we said, "Oh, sorry. And can we give you some money?" And he was cool. And I think we gave him $500 or something at that point. But that, and then, also from running the record store, we and being big fans of, like, say, Bowie or whatever, we knew about every time someone did a Bowie cover, so we thought, well, we'll put a Bowie cover or and a Velvet's cover on our record, and that way people who don't know us any other way or never heard of us might pick it up because it's got a Bowie song on it, and rather than pick a more well-known song. Throughout our trajectory, we've tried to pick cover songs that aren't the most obvious choices. So that's how we did. That's why they're on there. Not just to give people an idea of where we're coming from.
And it worked out great. I mean, it was just they were so cool. Must have been a lot of fun to record those. When you're doing something like that, recording some of your favorite artist songs, it takes you away from working on your originals. So it's like a kind of a fun thing to do. Because you're paying tribute and you love those tracks. So tell me, so you found out that Rodney was playing your song. Next thing you know, it becomes one of the most requested records at K-Rock, and it eventually is heard all over, Southern California. Like 91X is playing it in San Diego. It takes on this incredible life. So much so that when they used to do countdowns on K-Rock, I mean, it was the #1 record every single year. I think the only year that it came in #2 was the year that Nirvana exploded with Smells Like Teen Spirit. But I mean, even then it was #2. So, you know what I mean? So the song still means so much to so many people. But tell me about the move, because the first time I came to California in my life in the beginning of the 90s, I stayed on Chris Carter's couch and I hung out with you guys, and I came to your show with Bad Religion opening for you at the Hollywood Palladium. And it was just so great because, at this point I was DJing at HTG in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and that area. And we loved the band, so we were all playing. Mike Marone and everybody there were playing the band all the time as well. So it was just exciting to come out and see what was going on with the band. But tell me about how you made the decision as a band to move to California and follow the success of that. When did that happen? And talk to me about that.
Well, the record had been out about 6 to 8 months, and they were playing it on the radio, but I don't think we realized that it had gone from Rodney's show to regular rotation on K-Rock. And we came out for what we thought would be like a vacation. Rodney had come to New York the summer of '86 when the Monkees were getting back together. It was like their 20th anniversary, and they'd been playing it on MTV, the Monkees TV show. And so Mike and Peter and Davey were doing their first concert in New York. So Rodney came out for that, and he stayed on our couch in Lodi, New Jersey, and he said, "You guys got to come out and play in California. You do really well." So we came out that September, not expecting to stay for any length of time, and I think we just let our round trips go, and I think we some of us went back for the holidays later in the year, but we went from what was going to be a vacation, but then we sold out the Roxy, and we played a show with the Psychedelic Furs at a place called Irvine Meadows, and we were on the radio pretty much every other hour, and we were like, wow, why would we want to go back to why would we want to leave California and go back to New Jersey? So we ended up staying.
Yeah, but it was a good thing, and it worked out. Guys, I mean, it became one of the biggest songs ever. And, at this point in time, too, you've seen it covered by so many people, right, over the years. I mean,
it's incredible. Every once in, every now and again, you'll see another one pop up on YouTube. You could go, you can find a bunch on YouTube, and different people have done it over the years. It's a song that has a life of its own, over and above, whatever Dramarama is about. That song has its own little existence, and thank heavens for that.
I mean, it's amazing. You'll see a band like Buck Cherry do it, or Beach Singer, Blink-182, or there's so many different people that have covered the song, whether they do it as part of their live thing or have recorded it. It's
Warrant used to do it, for heaven's sakes.
Warrant did? Yeah, wow. That's amazing too. So yeah, that's pretty incredible. So that was it. So at this point, you come to California. The next record that you do, which is Box Office Bomb, was that on your own label at that period of time?
It was, and it was weird because, well, to be quite honest, we weren't the best live band. We didn't spend a lot of time on stage before we came to California. We'd done a handful of shows at places like the Dirt Club and a couple of local shows in New Jersey, but really hadn't paid our dues as a live act. So we came to California. Our song was on the radio every other hour. We had a hit record for all intents and purposes on this station, K-Rock, but we were not a world-class live performing band. And we had all the record companies come to see us, and they came to see the band, and then they kind of like left scratching their heads saying, oh, I don't know about these guys. So we had gotten some money from Capitol Records, and they had us do some demos, and they liked what they heard, and they wanted to give us more money to do some more demos. And we were like, no way, we know what we're doing. We're going to make our own record. We already have one record. We're going to make another record. So we put our second album out ourselves, and we said, we don't need these big labels. We'll just do it ourselves. And that was Box Office Bomb.
Didn't Jay Baumgartner work on that with you guys too?
He recorded it. Yeah, he helped record it. He was the engineer at that time. Yeah,
which is amazing. And on that record, I mean, we think about some of the stuff, and we talk about covers that you guys have done, like Patti Smith's "Pumping My Heart," which is just such a great cover of that song as well. Because Radio Ethiopia, to me, is like one of the most underrated albums of hers. I mean, people don't love it like they should, right? I mean, don't you think that's...
No, that might be my favorite Patti Smith record in a lot of ways.
Mine too, because I love Pissin' in a River and Ask the Angels, and all those songs are just, it's a great Jack Douglas production.
It's a rock and roll record for sure.
It is, and I love that record. I think it's one of those things like U2's second record where they don't really give it much credit, but because I mean, the next record was the kind of real breakthrough record. So they almost with Petty with You're Gonna Get It too. Same thing, they all these great second records, but never got the credit that it deserved. And of course you did Private World by the Dolls, which was a B-side, because the second record came out in England, not in England, but in Europe on New Rose again, right? Your parody. Mm-hmm. So I remember when they put out that single, and which was pretty amazing. But there were songs on there like, Worse Than Being By Myself, which lyrically is just such a brilliant song. I mean, I love that song so much because I think we've all been in a relationship where when you're with somebody, you're like, I'm so unhappy that I'd be better off alone. I mean, loneliness is better than the amount of unhappiness in a relationship. And we've all been there. I know I have. So, man, did I really take to that song when that came out. Talk to me about that song, because I love that tune.
I think, again, that had a lot to do with my first marriage. And we just, we made each other happy, but we also made each other unhappy. And we by the end of it, we weren't getting along, and it was difficult. It was painful, and I think a lot of the songs on there have a lot to do with that. That was where my head was at.
Yeah, it's amazing too. There's a lot of different pop culture stuff on there. Like, well, you talk about Steve and Edie in one song, and then, It's Still Warm is basically an ode to the fact that you guys had made your move to California, right? I mean,
exactly. And that song's about that. Out in the Rain is kind of about that, and about my first wife. But yeah, It's Still Warm is all about, hey, we're in California. Come on, it's just a 5-hour flight. And last night I was on TV, and all this stuff that was just, boggling my mind, because I went from working at Rickles, which was a home improvement store in New Jersey. And I got on the plane, and then next thing I know, I'm on the radio, and then playing concerts, selling out shows, and it was a very much messed up my mind in a lot of ways. I was kind of confused.
Yeah, but it was an amazing thing. I mean, yeah, here we go. So you have a second album. We're of course playing it a lot in New Jersey at that period of time at HCG, which was of course a great radio station. And then it came time to make a third album. And one of the things that I said, you talked about a lot of things in your songwriting too, the things that you experienced when you were younger. So the third album is called Stuck in Wonderama Land, and I love the fact that you make references to Wonderama, which for people that are watching this may or may not know what that show was, but it was a show that was basically for kids. I think it was on Sunday or Saturday morning. When was it on?
It was Sunday morning, as I recall.
Yeah.
It was like 5 hours long or something.
It was this really long thing, and there were more than one host. Well, am I right if I say, I know Sonny Fox you reference him in the lyrics, of course, and I think he passed away recently or something like that. But was Bob McAllister the other host?
Yeah, first it was Sandy Becker.
Oh, Sandy Becker. Yeah, okay.
Sandy Becker was first, and then he got his own show, like a weekday show. So then Sonny Fox took over, and he was he was a little bit more of a stern guy with a tie, and then Bob McAllister took over. And it's weird, like there's a YouTube video of like Roger Daltrey on Wonderama. Like all kinds of weird bands were on there. ABBA performed on Wonderama. All kinds of weird bands and weird guest stars would show up on Sunday morning on this show, and it was a wacky live.
Like local show. It was like it was on like it was back then. It would be Fox 5 now, but it was called Metro Media Television. That was
it was WNEW.
Yeah, which was amazing. So, and it was this long show, and I don't know if I ever sat through an entire episode of it, but I can tell you, you didn't have a lot of choices when we were kids growing up to watch. So you watched that show, right?
No, there was only 7 channels in black and white. Yeah, that was my Sunday morning. I would get up, watch it for an hour, go to church, come back and watch it for a couple more hours.
Yeah. I know, yeah, everybody would have to do the Sunday morning church. I know, like at least, I mean, I know I did it.
But it was still on. It was on before, it was on after. It was like, I think it was on from like 7 to noon or something like that.
Do you have any memories of it? I mean, you mentioned Roger Daltrey and ABBA being on that show, but do you have any other really crazy memories of that show? Like, were those kids, you always hear these stories about these guys that worked on kids shows, they kind of lose their shit once in a while and get really impatient with the kids. Did you ever see that happen on that show?
Not that I remember, no. And honestly, I was very young, so I don't have very vivid memories. Luckily, there are some videotape moments, and I've spent my time on YouTube looking for as much of it as I could find. But there's not a lot out there. People didn't have VHS or VCRs yet, so there's not as much laying around to watch. But I remember the kids all waving like this and there was like a little audience just of children, you know. It was a little peanut gallery. And yeah, I remember they had like contests, and they had Simon Says, and they had little games that they would like make you do, like little beat the clock games, like, you know, push a peanut around with your nose or eat an apple on a string or something, and you could win toys. That's what I remember about the show. And I always wished I could go on it, but I never, obviously, never got to.
I got to tell you, John, I was on one kid show on NBC. When I was 5, I was on a show called Birthday House with Paul Tripp.
Paul Tripp, great guy. He sang Hi Mike, I love you very much about the microphone. And
yeah.
He wrote a movie called
Christmas
That Almost Wasn't.
Yeah.
Was starred and was directed by Rossano Brazzi. And he's in it too. It's an interesting movie that I remember from when I was really little, and I think you could still find it somewhere out there. But yeah, he's in an episode of what did I see him in recently? He was in an episode of Have Gun Will Travel. You know, he was an actor, and he was big on the children's show. But yeah, I totally remember Mr. Tripp and what'd you say, Birthday House? Yeah,
Birthday House. My mom wrote into NBC to the producer of the show. I guess they had an address and said you're supposed to write in and say why your kid should be on the show. So I was picked on my birthday, May 28th. I think it was 1966 or 67. I was a little kid, and I remember coming home with a children's crown, and I had a little bass drum that came home with me, and like a bag from NBC.
Oh, how exciting!
I always wanted to find it, but they were on kinescopes, and they destroyed a lot of those. And there was a period where for rock fans that are watching, and people like you and I who love like old rock on TV and the old like 60s and 70s pop, they literally at one point were getting rid of everything. And this one guy, I think it is that guy, Michael Oakes, who has the archives that he licenses to everybody. They were just like literally getting rid of it. So somebody rented like a big moving truck and went and took all those tapes and kinescopes and everything that these channels had.
Wow.
And just basically owned them. Isn't that crazy? I mean,
no one ever thought there'd be everything was so temporary and short term. No one thought there would be any market for it in years to come. So much so that NBC apparently wiped all the tapes of like Johnny Carson when he was on in New York. The Tonight Show for like most of the 60s doesn't exist. It's nowhere to be found. That's why you don't see clips of John and Paul with Joe Garagiola when he guest hosted. But yeah, no, even companies like NBC, they didn't keep that stuff. They just tossed it, or like I said, they wiped the tapes and used them again.
That's what they did too at the BBC with Top of the Pops. Like there's a whole period of Top of the Pops where sporadically in the 1960s you'll get some of the episodes of that weekly music show that was on Thursday nights there, but generally everything is kind of mid 70s up, and everything before that you might get a couple things. But they did the same thing. BBC didn't think anybody cared or it would matter, so they just recorded over the actual broadcast.
Well, yeah, well, especially pop music. It never had that long of a shelf life. With the exception of maybe Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett, not many people made it from the 50s into the 60s. And by the time the Beatles came along, everything that came before it, no one listened to it, and no one expected the Beatles to last until now. It's things have changed and last a lot longer. Even look at it this way: our band's been around for 38 years almost, and
yeah.
38 years back from when we started the band in 1982, you're looking at the 40s. It's before rock and roll even began. When we started in 82, Elvis, was 25 years before us. It's weird. Music didn't last that long. People weren't listening to music from, I know when we grew up, we weren't listening to, Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller. We were listening to the music that was contemporary. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, and it's the things that have survived are pretty coveted, and it's great that those things have. I mean, the things that are still there. You know?
Gosh, yeah. And for kids, today they're still listening to the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and Jimi Hendrix for that matter.
And Bowie, everybody else. Right? Exactly. It's pretty amazing when you see that, and they're buying a lot of T-shirts as well. Now, also, what song on Stuck in Wonderama Land was one of the shortest great songs, Pumps on a Hill, which is on there. I mean, what does that song clock in at? Like a minute, 2 or
something right around there. Yeah. Long enough to be an Instagram video.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great tune. It feels like, it's there and it's gone, but it's amazing that you wrote this song that was a little over a minute. And it still had as much passion as any song. You know what I mean? In that short period of time, it was great. I love that. Now, you were on Chameleon Records at that period of time. Tell me about that. You finally ended up signing with a label. And I know around that time it was going to be like Chameleon or maybe EMI. I know was looking at you guys too,
when we signed with Chameleon, we had pretty much probably we learned from our mistakes, so to speak, with Box Office Bomb, because we couldn't promote it and we couldn't, get it on the radio outside of where we already were on the radio. And of course, commercial modern rock radio, there weren't many stations. There was HTG on the East Coast,
LAR and on the
LAR, and there were few and far between. Put it that way. The college radio was different, but commercial radio, there was like a handful of stations, maybe 20 or 21, if that many, in the late 80s. And so we signed with Chameleon, which was actually distributed by EMI, and they had a bunch of bands. In fact, they put out the John Lee Hooker record, the Healer, and they had a bunch of cool things going on over there. And so we signed with them, put that album out, and that's when we first started getting our little national attention with the song Last Cigarette. And that's when we first went on like a national tour of America, got in the van and drove around and actually played concerts in cities where we'd never been before, got played on radio stations in cities where we'd never been before.
Was that great seeing some of the other places? Because Last Cigarette became a classic and a big part of the show always, of the band playing live.
No, that was our first, national exposure for the most part. Anything for all its big, as much of a big deal as it was only on the air on the West Coast for the most part, except for HTG. And it was very much a local, regional kind of a thing. And so Last Cigarette was on HFS in Washington, and I think they played it on BCN up in Boston, and HTG, of course, and in a bunch of places where, like I said, we never had been before. There was a station in Chicago. We got to get out there and do stuff when we were, of course, able to perform on the Pat Sajak TV show.
Yeah, I mean, talk about some of the TV appearances you made. You did the Uncle Floyd show, which was like a big deal. Bowie wrote a song about it. The Ramones were on there. You ended up on the Uncle Floyd show, which was another one of those local access shows. It wasn't public access. It was actually on Channel 9, which was, WOR in New York.
Well, at first it was on UHF. And in fact, this guy, Steve Leeds, you might know, he was one of the executives over there, Channel 68.
Is that where it started? Because I know Steve well, of course.
Yeah. He was an executive over there, and they did UHF, and they also had like one of those scrambled porn channels on UHF.
Yeah,
so that was going on over there, and we knew Floyd because we sold Floyd's record at Looney Tunes. So even before we made a 45, when we just had a cassette, Floyd let us be on his show, and we were on that show like 3 or 4 times. So that was our first television experience. But then when we came to California, we did a few local shows, and then we were on the Pat Sajak show. We were eventually on the Dennis Miller show, had a show, and then we were on Letterman. And yeah, Dramarama was on TV, it's still, whenever anything we've ever done, I always kind of pinch myself because the music we were playing wasn't the kind of music we were listening to on the radio or that we could hear on the radio. It was the music we played at our houses, but growing up in New York, you didn't hear it on the radio except for that short period of time when WPIX was on the air. So we weren't planning on getting on the radio or making, a living being musicians. We were just making records that we liked because we wanted to make the kind of music that we enjoyed listening to.
Yeah, which is great. Speaking of TV appearances, I remember when Ellen DeGeneres was such a huge fan of yours that her producers reached out to you to come on her birthday as a birthday surprise to her, right? And play any on the air.
Yes, I think that had something to do with the fact that she liked that song "Anything, Anything" and the "Marry Me" line. And I think it was when she was getting up her courage to ask Portia to be her bride. So it was kind of hand in hand there because it came from the DJ who was on the show, and she used to ask him to play that song. She said every day she would ask him to play "Anything, Anything." So he hooked it up for us to be her birthday gift.
Yeah, which is a cool thing. I thought that was great when that happened. It was awesome. Let's talk about the next album, Vinyl, which I love that record too. That artwork is just one of the most stunning album covers. It's very cool. It's got that, the hand seat that basically looks like, full-on pop art 60s with almost like the 60s model in the middle of it. Talk to me about how did that artwork come together for that album?
We worked with a photographer named Scarpati, who actually also worked on the album cover for Stuck in Wonderama Land and also worked on the album cover for Hi-Fi Sci-Fi. So he was kind of an artist, and he was the one who did the work. But we wanted that 60s vibe, we were always kind of retro, kind of looking to the past, 1 foot in the future, 1 foot in the past. And that was always our thing, we were pop culture before there was such a thing as pop culture. We dug everything, and used to, all our references were always in our songs and in our artwork as well.
I thought it was a cool thing. I always look forward to it. It was great. Now on that album, there were 2 songs that were basically hits. I mean, at that point, Haven't Got a Clue and What Are We Gonna Do, which talks about Earth Day. And talk to me about that record. And that was a great time as well. I mean, radio was playing those songs. Tell me about that period for you.
Well, it was weird because we were on Chameleon, and Chameleon was bought by this guy who was really rich, and he bought the record company and immediately dropped all the bands that were on the label except for us, and took it from EMI to Elektra, part of the Warner Brothers family. And he also was a musician, and he wanted to make his own album. So I think that's why he bought the label, so he could have his own label and be the boss. But he also, all of a sudden we had money to spend on an album, on recording. We spent, we talked earlier about how much we spent on Cinema Verite, a couple thousand, and then when we made Box Office Bomb, we self-financed, and Wonderama Land, we financed those both ourselves. So we're talking, thousands of dollars and 4 figures for the most part. And I think Vinyl had a 6-figure by the time it was finished. We spent, weeks in the studio, and we got a producer named Don Smith who had worked with Keith Richards and with Petty and the Wilburys and all. He was top notch, and he helped us, get in touch with other artists like Mick Taylor plays guitar on there, and Beaumont Tench plays piano, and so he hired some studio guys. And our drummer had quit the band right before we went in the studio to record, so we had a session guy play drums on most of the record, and actually Jim Keltner plays on one song. And it was a totally different way of making a record for us. We'd never we spent more on food, for lunches on that album than we probably did for our other 3 albums.
It's amazing. It's that famous story. I remember once Dennis Leary telling me about working on a film. Maybe it was Judgment Night. And he goes, man, they spent more money on craft services on the table. He goes, like the whole crew was eating lobster and steak every day. He goes, you might as well just light $100 bills on fire and throw them in the toilet. It was a pretty funny story. I remember Dennis Leary telling me that. I was laughing so hard. But I mean, it wasn't quite to that extreme, obviously.
Oh, no. We worked and we didn't waste time. But we did take a couple hours for lunch every day. And, that's the way our producer was used to working, It was a studio. We recorded it mostly at a studio called Rumbo, which was owned by the captain from Captain and Tennille. And it was just a different kind of a facility than we were used to. And like I said, we had these, big name artists as our session guys. And, everybody was getting paid and we were spending lots of money in the studio. And I think the record, shows the time and effort that went into it, because it really sounds really good. And I think it stands up really well.
And it does. And it's got great songs like, Train Going Backwards, which is just one of the classics. I love that record. I love that song. It's a very epic tune on there. Tell me what it was like having Ben Montench there, obviously from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, who, good guy. How was it, him and Mick Taylor? Because obviously you being a fan of the Petty and the Heartbreakers and huge, that era of the Stones, that Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, that whole period, Sticky Fingers, Goat's Head Soup. You obviously were a Mick Taylor fan. Tell me about those experiences of working with those two guys.
In both cases, we were kind of in awe of those guys. I think Mick Taylor and Jim Keltner maybe a little bit more because of the Stones and Beatles connections, Beaumont, and also just because they were just legends, Beaumont was just more of a down-to-earth guy who came to work, and he was really good. In fact, in some cases, it was just me and him, and I would show him the songs, and then we would like overdub. The band would overdub after that. It was an incredible experience to work with Ben Montench, who's just one of the most talented guys in the world. Mick Taylor again, it's Mick Taylor. You think about all the amazing records he was on, and so I think we were a little bit in awe of him.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Like he was. I remember just looking and hearing those stories. Did you hear those stories too about how that he actually was the one who wrote the music for It's Only Rock and Roll, because he was in the studio with Mick Jagger, and before that all happened, and they were working on one song that ended up on not Mick Taylor. I'm sorry, I'm going forward. I'm thinking of Ronnie Wood, so I totally spaced on that. But I know, didn't it look like Mick Taylor, and at least towards the very end with the Stones in the videos, like It's Only Rock and Roll, like he was kind of fed up and was ready to leave at that period of time?
Yeah, well, I mean, why do you quit the Stones to go? What did he join? Blues Breakers or something? He went to go play with John Mayall or something. I mean, you're playing stadiums. You're playing, you're living the lifestyle. But at the same time, maybe it was a good choice because you get to live a lot longer. It's probably hard to keep up with Keith Richards.
Yeah, which is amazing. But Ronnie Wood's still doing it, and he's doing great, right?
Ronnie's playing better than ever before. And that's got a lot to do with him getting sober, I think.
Yeah. When I interviewed the Stones, it was when the Bigger Bang album came out, and I did like an album special with all 4, everybody but Bill Wyman, because he wasn't in the band anymore. But Ronnie had just gotten out of rehab. So Ronnie comes in, and then Keith, he's drinking Fanta orange soda and Grey Goose vodka. And then Mick sits down, Mick Jagger, and then Charlie Watts, and Charlie had recently had like that throat cancer surgery. Ugh. But they were all drinking tea except for Keith. But I asked him about his taste buds because Fanta orange soda. But yeah, those guys are still great. They always have.
Absolutely.
There was a whole story. The reason I was confused, getting myself confused. A story about it. Ronnie Wood was really involved in the writing, even though he didn't get credit for the title track of It's Only Rock and Roll.
Well, I think there's like a credit like special thanks to Ronnie Wood for It's Only Rock and Roll, but they didn't give him the songwriting credit, and he doesn't get royalties.
Yeah, but it worked out for him one way or another. He's still there doing his thing, so he made a good choice, right?
Yeah, no, he's a Rolling Stone, you know. Unlike Daryl, the bass player, who's been in the band probably twice as long as Bill Wyman was, and still he still doesn't get to be in the pictures.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's it. You know, it's crazy. Well, they were doing that from the beginning with their keyboard player, Ian Stewart, right? I mean,
Yep. Oh, not you, Ian. You go stand over in the corner there.
Poor guy, Stewie, right? And he was important to that band, no question about it.
No, he was still playing piano with them up until, you know, Tattoo You or whatever.
Yeah.
Until he passed. He was still on stage with them.
Yeah, he was amazing. Certainly, he was great. Now, the next album was 93. It was Hi-Fi Sci-Fi.
Mm.
Had great songs like Work for Food was on there, which was a big single off that record. It was really interesting. Tell me about the lyrics to that song, Work for Food.
I was kind of looking to the future and thinking of what it'd be like to be in a band, you know, to be a singer who, you know, was homeless, you know. And so I was basically, you know, being Nostradamus and, you know, a possible future of mine of being a homeless guy. But I'm pushing a shopping cart and it's got, you know, posters and old photographs of me, and look at me. You know, I don't know. I by that point, the band had been working, you know, going up and going up and going up. And I think that was about where we hit our plateau. You know, we were fighting with the record label because now we had a record label to fight with, you know. When we put out Wonderama Land with Chameleon, we recorded it and didn't have any input. And when we did vinyl, you know, it was Honeymoon. That was the first record we did with a record company where a record company would have any input and try to give us, you know, try to A&R us, if you will. And by the second album, they were more like, well, we don't hear a single on this one. You know, it was the old story, you know. And we were also fighting with them, like, why aren't you doing this for us? And why aren't you doing that for us? You know, we thought we knew everything. And if I was to give anybody advice about how to work with a record company, it would be just shut up and let them tell you what's best. Don't you try to tell them what you think is best, because that was us. We were very opinionated and we had big mouths, and we got ourselves in trouble that way. And so, yeah, that's what Work for Food was about. Just kind of, you know, didn't really think this was going to work out. Everything was going to work out, and didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what the future held for me. So that's what that was about.
Yeah. You know, so you took some time, obviously, between the next album with Everybody Dies, right? You know, I mean, there were some EPs, there was stuff that went on, but right.
Well, the band, for all intents and purposes, that album came out, Hi-Fi Sci-Fi came out, and it was in between when vinyl and Hi-Fi Sci-Fi came out. The whole grunge thing exploded. Nirvana came out, Pearl Jam came out, and when we put out Hi-Fi Sci-Fi, there was kind of like a chasm between the bands that came before and the bands that came after. And really, the radio stations that used to play us, they weren't playing bands from the 80s anymore. They had moved on, and they were playing, even though we were playing hard rock and playing guitar rock, they just, you know, we weren't getting the same kind of look, which, you know, when a band's working on its fifth album, sixth album, you know, you're not a new band anymore. You're not you're not the next big thing to some people, you know, them again, you know.
Oh, but it's great though that you guys just kept, you know, I mean, I love the fact that you decided to keep writing and doing what you're doing and touring, because, you know, there's always been an audience for you out there, which is great. People
sure. So the band, for all intents and purposes, broke up at that point in 94. We did one last big show at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park.
I was there with you, which was, I remember, 2 shows in a row, 2 nights in a row, remember?
Yeah, it was a great farewell, you know. It was a great way to go out.
It was like 115 degrees in there, maybe 120. It was so packed, and people were going wild. And you remember, you walked in the venue and you just covered in sweat, because that's how people were going wild. It was great.
Yeah.
great weekend.
It was
Show.
New Jersey became our home away from home. It was kind of weird because when we first moved out to California, we would come back to New Jersey and couldn't get a gig. And then it turned around thanks to HTG and stuff. So like we did the very first outdoor show at the Stone Pony, and you actually introduced us at that. I found a videotape of it the other day where you're introducing us at the back, the big backyard of the Stone Pony. And yeah, it was amazing it was a really nice change, it was a big circle. We came back to finally being able to play in New Jersey and have people come see us.
Yeah, which is great. And they still do. And I love that. And I've seen so many great shows that you've done there. And I've witnessed them, and, I always love coming to see the band play live. It's just, for me, it's something that I always enjoy. I mean, I've definitely, you're one of the bands in my lifetime that I've seen the most, you know what I mean? We
go way back, man.
Which is,
so took a couple of years off, made a solo record, took a couple more years off. Then VH1 did this show called Bands Reunited, where they get bands back together. And that's how Dramarama got back together in 2003. And we thought it was going to be just one show, but we ended up playing a concert for K-Rock, and it was a big outdoors festival thing. And it was just amazing kind of a reception that we got. And so we kept it going, and we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I think that's great. And how was that experience of shooting that Bands Reunited thing that you did with VH1?
It was surreal, like so many things in our career, whether it was moving to California in the first place, unexpectedly, all of a sudden we're playing concerts and we're on the radio. And then, most of the really cool things that have happened in our career have just been like out of the blue. Like all of a sudden we're there, Dave Letterman called us, said, "Hey, can you come out?" Called us on a Monday, said, "Hey, can you come out and be on the show on Thursday?" Ellen DeGeneres show called us on a Monday, said, "Hey, can you come out and we're taping on Wednesday?" The VH1 show, it was like, none of us were expecting it. None of us were planning it. I don't think we ever would have gotten back together. Although me and Mark and Peter had remained friends and continued to play with each other over the years. Yeah, we didn't plan on getting back together, doing a reunion. It wasn't something that we planned or strategized. It just kind of happened, and yeah, it was very weird, and it was very cool.
It was great. There's no question about it. Now, before we talk about the last album, the latest album, which is Color TV, I want to go through some of your favorite albums. Now, one of the things we do here on the show is ask people to talk about 7 of their favorite albums of all time, or 7 albums that have been influential to them or a big part of their life. And I love your choices because it's so diverse. It's so awesome. I mean, a lot of these things are super. I mean, you and I are such music fanatics and love so much stuff. I know it's a hard thing to pick 7 of anything, but at the same time, I love what you did here. So I'm going to start. The first one we're going to do is the Mary Poppins soundtrack, because this blew me away. I love that you picked this. Was this something that one of the first things you discovered as a child? Tell me about it.
Oh, absolutely. No, it was the very first movie I went that my mom took me to see in the movie theater. And it's the first album that I remember, making the choice. I was probably like 3 or 4 years old, and saying, put that on again, and watching the record go around. And it was before I was old enough to have my own record player. So it's where I think I developed a love of vinyl and of records and of music, and songs. So I wouldn't say that I followed the songwriting of the Sherman Brothers, but I still love that album, and I still love all the songs, and I know all the words by heart. And I think I learned how to read by reading the liner notes of that album. And yeah, Mary Poppins was, the very first record that I remember, saying, "Mommy, play that record again, put that on again." And we had one of those console stereos where the record player was part of the television. It was all, big giant piece of furniture in our living room. And
yeah, like they flipped up on the top, and you had the TV under it, and
exactly.
two speakers on both sides of the TV tube.
Sure.
Which is amazing. Those classics. Really good. I mean, they sounded really. There was a lot of boom and bass in those.
Oh yeah, we had a big RCA, and it was the centerpiece of my life until I got my own record player. And
how old were you when you got your first your first record player? I was
probably 5 years old.
5, right? Yeah, because 5. That's what I thought. Do you remember the first record you got when you were 5? The first record you played?
I got the 45 of I'm Not Your Stepping Stone and I'm a Believer. That's the first one I remember going to the store and saying, I want that.
Yeah, how great. I mean, of course, those Monkey records.
I turned 5 that September that they came on the air.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, wasn't it? I mean, I just, we loved that show when you were a kid. It was like your first glimpse into rock and roll because,
Well, yeah, more than the Beatles. I was a little too young for the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I mean, I remember more about like shows like F Troop and stuff had Beatle-like bands. They all had like bug bands, bands with Beatles,
Flintstones had like
Jeremy were guests on a lot of different shows. They were on Batman and whatnot.
Yeah, like the Standells were on like the
Monsters, sure. I remember those, and I remember those bands, but they didn't kind of like really register. There was just like rock and roll, and I dug it, but the Monkees was the thing,
Yeah, let's talk about your next record because it is the debut album from the Monkees, and what a great record that first record is. I mean, I love the first 4, to be honest with you. I mean, there's great stuff on all of them, even Head, but this record is really incredible. There's so many cool things on it.
Again, that's the first rock and roll record I ever owned, and I got it that Christmas. So Christmas of '66, I got to meet the Monkees. I got the Monkees' first album, and by then I had my own record player, and I wore that thing out, and as well as the next few Monkees records. And then from there, then the Beatles came into my life.
Yeah, talk to me about the songs on this record that you loved. Obviously, you covered "Sweet Young Thing," which is such a cool song. It's another one. We were talking about your short song "Pumps on a Hill." Even on this album, before the end of the album, it's the next to last song on this Monkees record. It's such a great tune. It's written by Carole King and Jerry Goffin, right? But also with Mike Nesmith, who truly is the best songwriter in the band. He was the guy who wrote so many things. I mean, Mike Nesmith wrote all these songs and kind of in his own way started Americana. I mean, you know what I mean?
Oh my God. Yeah, no, a brilliantly talented guy. And if you get the opportunity to go see them, him and Mickey have been doing shows, and they're incredible because they don't just do the hits. They go deep and just play some of the. It's just amazing to see those guys. They're still really talented and still really great to watch. But yeah, no, that album, every song on that album meant everything to me. Boyce and Hart were great songwriters, and it's interesting to me to go backwards and look. And if you look, on YouTube there's the pilot episode of it, and instead of using the Monkees, Mike and Davey and Peter and Mickey's voices, it's Boyce and Hart playing them and singing, and it just sounds so weird. There's like a Dylan-y folk rock version of "I Want to Be Free" rather than the ballad, the quiet, pretty ballad that you're familiar with. It's a different vibe when it started out, and they were lucky to find these guys.
Last Train to Clarksville and Take a Giant Step, right? And all those songs that were on.
Amazing. I Want to Be Your Dog. Come on. That's a great, I don't want to be your dog. I Want to Buy Me a Dog. Excuse me. Sorry about that, Iggy. I Want to Buy Me a Dog. And just everything on that record. Papa Jean's Blues, and
yeah,
so many good songs.
They need to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, it's ridiculous. I get that. You hear that argument with some of the older people that, oh yeah, well, they didn't play on their. Neither did Whitney Houston, and she's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, and no disrespect to Whitney, she's a talented woman, but I'm just saying the Monkees were very inspirational. Music on TV, it was the thing. I mean, they deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Elvis didn't write his songs. Frank Sinatra didn't write his songs. I understand the fact that they didn't come up from the garage as a group, that they all were hired to be in the band originally. And so I understand that. And I think people in the 60s, they didn't dig that. They were what do they call them? The prefab four, they were all hired to be, cast members on a TV show, but they surpassed that, and then they rose above that, and they did start writing their own songs. And Mike Nesmith in particular, as you said, one of the great songwriters of all time. He wrote Different Drum. He and invented country rock, more or less. It
really, What Am I Doing Hanging Around, and all those songs that he had, like Love, and great songs like Love Is Only Sleeping and During the Summer, all that stuff. There's just great songs on all those records from Mike Nesmith.
Terrific songwriter. There's a song he wrote called Summer Shelley's Blues, which is just one of the best songs ever written. He's just brilliantly talented, and they just don't get the credit that they deserve. It's true.
No, it's true. So the next album that you picked is one that I know we mutually love, Mott the Hoople's Mott album, which was the one that came after their breakthrough with All the Young Dudes, when they almost broke up before that, until David Bowie said they had to stay together and gave them All the Young Dudes for that album. But that Mott record, you've covered a track from there. You do a great version yourself on your album, one of your albums, of I Wish I Was Your Mother, which ends this record. And I love your version. Tell me why this record. It's obvious. I know you're a big fan like I am.
I remember hearing that record, and it just cut through like nothing else in my life. I was reading the lyrics. I remember reading the lyrics to Honolulu Boogie, and I don't know. There was just songs on that record, and Ian Hunter's songwriting, and particularly his lyrics. But I mean, the music really grabs you too. But that record in particular just resonates with me to this day, and it really changed my life. After the Monkees, I think that's the next album that just changed my life and changed the path of my listening enjoyment. And it's weird because I think this and a couple of the other records on the list, I didn't get to them until a couple of years, later. I wasn't listening to them when they first came out. I think I probably picked this up 75 maybe, and probably a couple of the others too. By the time I was 14, 15, and could make my own choices. And I met a friend, a guy named Paul, whose big brother had these records, and I went over his house, and he was playing me all these records and I'd never heard before, Bowie and Mott and just, blew my mind, the early glam stuff. I wasn't right there in 72, 73. I don't think I got there till 74, 75.
Same here, because we were both too young. That was the thing. We discovered it a little later, but went back and bought all those albums. And then, like I said, on Stuck in Wonderama Land, you did I Wish I Was Your Mother, a great version. And it's also interesting. Do you think about this record is, it was the last record with Mick Ralphs, right? Because Mick Ralphs, after that, decided to go and join Bad Company. And Ian Hunter always told me, he said, well, the reason he left is, he had written these songs, and Ian Hunter basically said to Mick, I can't really sing in that range. It's not really my range. So, but it was cool. A lot of people don't know Ready for Love, that Bad Company was originally on All the Young Dudes, Rouse, great song.
By that time, I mean, they had like 6 or 7 albums, right? They'd been around. Although in those days, you'd put out 6 and 7 albums in 3 years. But they had a whole career on Atlantic before they got signed to Columbia, and Bowie pretty much picked them out of got them back together to do All the Young Dudes.
Yeah, which is so great. And then Mott's my favorite album by them as well. And then the Hoople, but I also love the All the Young Dudes album. That run is so great. they're amazing. Now, Roxy Music's first album is the next one that you pick. And I'm sure that was hard because there's so many great Roxy albums. I mean, right? I mean, I'm sure I know you love For Your Pleasure too, and things like that. I even love Siren. I think Siren is an incredible record, man.
I think all the first run of the 70s, all the Roxy Music of the album 70s, that first 5 run is I can't think of 5 other records in a row that come close, except maybe Elton John's little run there in the early 70s. He did a pretty good bunch in a row. But I love all those records. And I say Roxy, the first album was the first Roxy Music album that I heard. But again, this was later. And this was also something that I discovered all by myself. I found it, I bought it as a cutout, and I was like, wow, I had heard of the band, I'd read about them, but I never heard any of their music. Obviously they weren't on the radio in New York. And, it was just, I was intrigued by the album cover, and then opening it up and looking at those pictures of those guys, Eno and Manzanero with the glasses, and just, they looked so cool. Brian Ferry, at that point, he had the slick back hair, and he was, I don't know, they were just wacky looking, but yeah, that record, that's something I discovered. The band I discovered by myself, nobody else's big brother or nobody else turned me on to it. It was something I found, and then, everything after that, one of the best greatest hits albums of all time is the first Roxy Music greatest hits album. It's got Dramarama on it, and Brian Ferry is still one of my favorite songwriters of all time, and I love that album.
Yeah, so do I. The greatest hits I know with the stuff from Country Life, like Thrill of It All and All I Want Is You. What great songs. Out of the Blue. I love all that stuff.
Stranded is a great album. For Your Pleasure does have The Bogus Man, which is a little long, but
Yeah. Bogus Man we could have kind of lived without, but it's all right. But side one is phenomenal, right?
It definitely is.
It's such a great one, and I love that. Now, the next one you picked was Iggy Pop's Lust for Life. What a great record. Of those 2 that he did in that period with Bowie, I like them. I love this and The Idiot, but this is definitely my favorite of those. Tell me why.
Of those 2, I think this one gets the nod, and this was also the first one I heard, and that just hooked me, and it rocked a little harder, I think, and that title track, just from the opening beat of Hunt and Tony Sales, just pull it together and just kicks ass, and every song on that record, I really love that album, and it's hard to pick 7, like you said, and there's a bunch of bands that aren't represented in my list that belong in there, whether it's the Beatles or the Kinks or T-Rex or Sex Pistols, obviously, and Clash, and I went through a whole list of things, Rundgren and Sparks and all this stuff that meant a lot. Alice Cooper really made a big, in between the glam and the British Invasion and the Monkees, Alice Cooper was there. And
it was
big, very important when Alice was a band, and not just a man. That had a big influence on my life. But by this time with Iggy and stuff, I was into Bowie, and I think I like this better than I like the Bowie music of the time, because he was doing, the Bowie music of Berlin was, at the time I didn't really dig where Heroes and
Low and
those albums came from. By the time Logic came out, I was digging it, and then I went back and I liked it, but the first few Eno records, I was kind of like, I don't know about this. And that was, again, also around this time when I discovered Roxy Music, and then I started to dig Eno, and those first few Eno solo albums are amazing too.
I know those are ones you go back to and go, wow, this is really cool and creative. And, there was so much great stuff coming out that a lot of those things, we were young, we couldn't afford to buy all those records, right? And then a lot of things you went back and said, wow, you spent time with it, because when there's so many things, so much quality coming out,
Well, yeah, and that was the beauty of having the record store in 79, because then we could get anything we wanted. We'd open it up and play it, and we didn't care. So that I discovered a lot of music too when I met Chris Carter, and he really turned me on to a lot of stuff. I turned him on to some stuff, and that had a lot to do with changing my life as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. Now, the next album you picked, I agree. This is my favorite Elvis Costello album too, and I like quite a few of them, no question about it. But this year's Model, man, it's like, wow. I mean, that is such a punchy record. It's just, he's got a lot of venom. He's, you can tell he's pissed off. He's just spewing amazing lyrics. Tell me why you love this record so much.
Well, I love the songs. He's got the Attractions finally on this one. This is the first Attractions album, so you get that vibe of like a new band, and it just it just comes pumping right out of the gate, and it just kicks ass. Every song on there I love, and I remember driving around and listening to the 8-track, and my friend, he had a Plymouth Arrow, a yellow Plymouth Arrow, and I just remember just wearing this 8-track out. It was the best. It just at that age, I was like 16, 17, something, and that, this represents everything, Sex Pistols, I remember going into Bleecker Bob's and buying the 45 of God Save the Queen before the album came out. And obviously that made a big difference in the Ramones and all the music of the punk and post-punk, whatever, that early, new wave before it became known as new wave, if you will. But this record is the ne plus ultra of them all for me. This record really makes and kind of represents, a high point of all that stuff.
It really does. I think it's incredible. And the, the playing on it, like you said, the Attractions. A lot of people don't know the first band was Huey Lewis and the News Band. They were called Clover at the time. That was backing up Elvis Costello on his debut album. But, the Attractions were just on fire. That was the thing about this, I mean,
absolutely.
Lipstick Vogue. I mean, that drum and bass, it's on fire. I love it.
Yeah, best band.
So great. Now, the next record, and the final one we picked was, what a great record, because I'm guessing you and I were going to see him a lot at the same time, because he was always playing the clubs in New Jersey, too, and that's David Johansen from the New York Dolls, his debut solo album, the one with Funky But Chic and Girls and Cool Metro. Great record, I mean, man, and he was always playing in all the clubs in Jersey, so I'd see him all over the place, and I would go and go and go.
Absolutely. I went to see him probably 20 times back then in clubs. One of the first concerts I went to, a nightclub, I had to get a fake ID because I wasn't even 18 yet, so it had to be early 79, probably right about when this album came out. And I was too young, I guess, to dig the Dolls. I learned about the Dolls after the David Johansen. I saw pictures of the Dolls in like Circus and Cream, but I never heard those records until after I got this first David Johansen album, and I went to see him at a nightclub with a fake ID, and I just was blown away. And he was such a great entertainer, and a great singer, just one of the greatest frontmen I think of all time.
Yeah, he was amazing. He was so good. That's when he had that band of all those guys, like, Frankie Larocca, who was a nice man who passed away quite a few years ago. Great guy, great drummer.
I did not know that. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he passed away. I mean, last time I spoke to him was when I was doing A&R at Columbia, and he was
a great drummer. He went on to be like an A&R guy, didn't he?
He did A&R for a while too. That's why he reached out, and it was cool that we connected. I talked about seeing him at all these places like the Royal Manor Fountain Casino, City Gardens, like all these Fast Lane and
the show place in Dover.
Yeah, the show place in Dover. All those Jersey venues.
I actually saw the first Johansen show I went to. The Cramps opened up for Johansen, and that was the wildest show. I never saw anything like that in my life. I still to this day, Brian was still playing guitar for them. It was early on. He was like smoking these Winston 100s and just like kept spitting them at people. He'd light one and spit it at the crowd. It was punk rock was in it all its glory.
Yeah, absolutely, it was. And but I just felt that, again, he was a great frontman. And I remember you felt like when you saw David Johansen in that period of time, you kind of felt like he was your artist, because it was very much a thing around our area at that period of time, like New York, New Jersey, right? I mean, it was.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I love him with a passion. I think that's what made me more than I wanted to sing, and I sang in bands at that time. But when I saw him, I wanted to be that guy, man. I was like, yeah, that's how you do it. That guy knew how to work a room, man.
He really did. He was great. And that's the album right after it, too. In Style was great, man. What a great
Produced by Mr. Mick Ronson.
Yeah, who we love. Mick Ronson is you're my favorite of all time. And did you watch that documentary on him that's called Beside Bowie?
No.
There's a really great documentary on Amazon Prime. You don't have to pay, if you have Amazon Prime, you don't have to
I do.
Got to watch this documentary all about, and Bowie, before he died, narrated part of it. You could
wow.
Tribute to
that's one of the last great moments of rock in my life that I still tear up just thinking about it. Was when Ian Hunter and Bowie and Mick Ronson played all the young dudes at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so great.
I was not prepared for it. I melted. It was just a great moment. And I think even by that time, maybe Mick was sick. I don't know, but he was just such a great guitar player.
Yeah. I mean, he was sick, and but it addresses all that in a special. And you got to definitely see this film. It's amazing. I'll tell you something you'll appreciate, John. And you played there before the Fast Lane years ago when you were probably there when he and Ian Hunter were signing autographs at Looney Tunes. But I was a kid. We're around the same age, so I was a kid and I snuck backstage. I was like 17 for the tour for Welcome to the Club or You're Never Alone with a Schizophrenic. I was and I snuck backstage at the Fast Lane in Asbury Park, and Mick Ronson let me hold his guitar. He was and tune it, and he was so nice to me. And he and Ian Hunter, and and it was this happened twice, also with Joe Jackson and his band, where the bouncers came back and said, "What are you doing here?" And they were like, "Oh, he's cool. He's with us. He's all right."
Nice. Yeah, I saw Ian and Mick when starting with Schizophrenic, and yeah, I saw him a bunch of times. And we would drive down from Wayne to Asbury Park and saw him at the Fast Lane, saw him at Convention Center, because the E Street Band's on that record,
Yeah.
So they were doing, saw him at the Capitol Theater. I just, drove out to my father's place when they were recording the live album. It was just, that was the greatest.
Yeah. So it was so great to be able to see all those shows back then. Remember, I mean, and the shows were cheap. I remember seeing Tom Petty for $4 and seeing the Police for $2. And, in one weekend you see the Police, Joe Jackson and Elvis Costello with the attractions. I mean, it was just the stuff that, it was fun. It was
it was incredible. And I remember, I still to this day, I remember paying $25 for a Rolling Stones ticket. I guess when Tattoo You came out, and I think I scalped it or whatever, but I was like, I'll never pay more than that. That's highway robbery for a $25 ticket. Are they kidding? And those were the days.
Yeah, they were absolutely, weren't they? I mean, it was incredible seeing all those shows for cheap. And I remember at the time, going to places like Ticketron, or you'd just go to the venue and buy tickets. It was crazy.
You go to I forget what stores had them. Different stores had them upstairs, department stores, Macy's or Sears or stuff, would have a little Ticketron in the back of the department store.
And you could buy your concert tickets, and you never knew. For some reason, I never got great seats when I was younger. I think
they used to have those lotteries where you would mail in a check and to hope maybe they would mail you back tickets. That's why a friend of mine won tickets to the Who at the Capitol Theater that way.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, you get your check back.
Yeah. And that was a great venue too. We saw so many great shows there. Hey, let's talk about, before we say goodbye, John, I want to talk about the latest album, Color TV. I love this record. And tell me about this one now. Did you end up producing this on your own? I worked with a good man, a great man named Jeff Greenberg, who really has been a part of
my life since the band first took off. He owns a recording studio called The Village.
Jeff is the best. He's such a good dude.
Yeah, and he's always been really kind to me and real generous, and let me go in and use the studio on nights and weekends when he's not otherwise occupied with all the superstars that work there. It's one of the best facilities in the world, and they've worked with everybody from the Stones and Dylan and right up to the present day. They have T-Bone Burnett recorded a lot of his records there. I remember Elton and Leon were in there. I guess that was a couple of years ago now, but it's still one of the best facilities. And he lets me sneak in there on nights and weekends. But he's also always been very supportive of me and a big fan, even, is what he says anyway. But for this album, he co-produced with me because he had a vision for what he wanted this record to be and how he heard it. And so he's my co-producer on this album. But yeah, it took a long time to put together because, like I said, we only get to sneak in on nights and weekends. And also Jeff had a lot of ideas that he didn't quite hear it, and he'd go back in and do new mixes and have other engineers fiddle with it and tinker with it, and it took a long time, but I'm really happy with the way it came out.
That's great. Now, are you going to make up some of those shows as soon as this COVID thing ends? Because I know you had a tour booked at that period of time.
Yeah, I sure hope so. We have some shows booked for next year, but gosh, I know Broadway's closed till June, and the Metropolitan Opera is closed till September, and now the virus is coming back, and only time will tell how it works out, and only time will tell how people feel about going back into clubs and theaters, and the way it stands right now, even if they could open up, they could only open up with a smaller capacity. So, tickets that were already expensive, they'd have to double the prices to make what they were making before. And it's not like anybody was making tons of money, So it remains to be seen what's going to happen, but I can't wait because I really wish we could have gone out and played this shows for this album, and eventually we will.
Yeah, and I look forward to it, John. I think it's going to be great, man. I'm excited about that, and I just want to let everybody know that they can pick up either you have a CD of it. Is the album on vinyl too?
It will be.
I know it's streaming everywhere, so however people consume their music, they can get it.
That seems to be the way people listen to music. So yeah, it's streaming on all the platforms. There are CDs, and the vinyl is coming out. I don't know if it'll be out in time for the holidays, but soon after.
Absolutely. That's great.
And actually, at that point, there's also, I'm announcing it here, where we're also putting out Cinema Verite on vinyl again, too.
That's phenomenal. And, a lot of people want to know, the question is, it's not streamable right now on Spotify. Is that something that will be changed at some point? Do you know
Cinema Verite, yes, will also be made available on all the streaming platforms. Right now, I think it's on Apple, and it's on YouTube, and it might be on Amazon. I'm not sure. But yeah, when streaming first came along, I didn't know what it was going to be about. So I at first I didn't, I opted out. But now that it's become the way for people to listen, and downloads are going away, it's probably silly of me to keep it from there. So yeah, first few all the records that I'm in control of will be a part of that in the not too distant future.
We're very excited about that because people were, the only way they could only really hear that live at the China Club version of anything on something like Spotify, right? And it was, it's amazing. I was there that night when you recorded it in New York.
Sure. Yeah. Now, once Warner's and everybody put everything everywhere, they put all the albums on YouTube and stuff. So it's everywhere now. And our stuff, all our first few albums will also be everywhere real soon.
That's great. We look forward to it. John, thanks for doing this today, man. It was great to have you.
I could talk to you for hours, Maddie. I always do. We get on the phone for a 2-minute conversation. It turns into a 2-hour conversation.
You know what? Because we talk about life, our families, the music we love. We have
a shared history.
We do. I mean, our friendship goes back decades, and it's so great to have you here on the show. I loved it, man. It was great. And take care, and I'll speak to you soon, and we'll let everybody know what's going on. But they should pick up Color TV. Definitely, you should get that. It's a great record if you want it on CD. Vinyl will be available soon, and that news about Cinema Verite being on vinyl again is a big deal, and also being on all the streaming platforms and the first 3 albums. Right? I'm very excited about that.
Love you, my brother.
All right, John, listen, take care, man. It was great. Thanks so much for joining us, man.
Thank you so much for having me on, man. I greatly appreciate it.
It was great, John. Take care now. Thanks for being a part of this. I'm half awake. Still, middle of the day. That's what I get for hiking, getting up at 6 a.m. to hike like 6 miles up and down hills in Griffith Park before.
You're looking great, bro.
I'm working really hard at it, man. I'm telling you, Johnny, it's one thing after you get hit by a car and have your leg broken in half, and all this craziness I've been through. I'm working on that.
Being healthy is something that when you're young, you don't worry about it. But now it's a good thing to take. It's good to take care of yourself.
Yeah, and that's the path I'm on these days, which is great. And I plan on staying on it, So, John, thanks again, man, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Not at all, Maddie. Thank you.
All right, you got it. It's John Easdale, everybody, from Dramarama. Once again, a lot of people have been asking about when that original first album and those first few albums are going to be available on streaming services. You got the word right here. It's going to finally be available for Dramarama fans. And about the new album, Color TV. I'm Matt Pinfield. I will be back with you next week at the same time on Friday. Meantime, have yourself a great weekend. Thanks so much for watching. And I want to thank everybody that's involved with this show, of course. Chris Trevero, Laura Diaz, Alyssa, Steve, Josie, Carrie Brown, everybody who makes this possible and everyone who helps us out. And John Easdale, of course, today for joining us. Remember, you're never alone if you have music in your life. You've been watching In a Lonely Place. So great to have you here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.